And then you've got content that's like PvP, like, just the standard multiplayer kind of competitive stuff. And balancing weapons and abilities, different things are fun. When you balance for fun, for just, I'm just a player against AI, there's a lot of different considerations than I'm a player and there's another player. So like, for one, all the mechanics need to be balanced against each other. Like if I'm using some gun or some ability against another player, it needs to be balanced against the different, you know what I mean?
Right. So you're saying that even something like an FPS, even if you're making the same type of game, it makes a difference between balance when you're doing single player, multiplayer. You can't just stick one or the other, vice versa, into the game expecting it to be perfect.
Exactly. And that's a problem that Destiny has had, is that, when you balance the game for multiplayer, it's not necessarily as fun for single player.
Oh, right. I guess, yeah, they try to be more lenient towards the player and they're a little tougher to kill. So I guess a gun that seems powerful against AI might seem weak versus players. Oh,
yeah.
That's a good point. Andrew, any thoughts?
I mean, really, one of the major issues we've had with multiplayer is that the game really needs to be designed from the ground up with multiplayer in mind. I think we've seen it. We've seen it occasionally in the indie or the AAA market. A lot of the times in the AAA market, where a game that's clearly meant to be a single player game has PvP kind of tacked onto it.
Okay.
Or PvP or any sort of multiplayer really, but generally speaking, you can lump in cooperative PvE with single player, I think.
Yeah.
A lot of the time, because I mean it's the same rule of fun, I guess. Where things are balanced, for fun, for the players to have fun.
Yeah.
And as long as the players aren't competing against each other, then it doesn't really matter, as long as they're being somewhat challenged. But as soon as you tack PvP onto a game that's not really meant to have it, it becomes very clear that it wasn't designed. Because really it comes down to balance and challenge.
Okay.
So players generally have fun if they're if they have a bit of a challenge. Obviously, if the challenge is too much, then it becomes no longer fun. And if it's unbalanced, the challenge will either be, non-existent, or too much, and that affects, the amount of fun that players can have.
Fair enough.
Yeah. You can definitely lump PvE and single player, because it's like, I guess the difference is like, who are you fighting, right? Like in PvE or single player, you're always it's you fighting against AI, fighting against, the computer. So whether or not you're accompanied by other players, it doesn't make as big a difference.
Tyson? You've been oddly quiet.
To further put up on Andrew's point, like even from like a programming perspective, you kind of have to have a really good idea of whether you want your game to be single player or multiplayer. Based off my own memory, if I recall correctly, there were some issues with when we were developing Blobs. It was either Blobs or Halen, where basically the way something was made, it gave us difficulties with doing multiplayer. Just in the way the code is written, right? Like if you have a player class, right, but you're expecting to have multiple players, you should probably not link the controls to like whichever player, right? I don't know if I phrased that very well.
Well, neither game we made was designed. Well, sorry, Halen was not designed with multiplayer in mind at all. Not even we didn't consider it. Blobs, from a programming perspective, was designed for multiplayer, but not for online multiplayer.
Yeah, and that's a big consideration difference as well.
Absolutely. Which is why you're probably not going to be seeing online Blobs in the near future, if at all. simply because it's not something we designed it for. It was when we came up with the idea, it was designed as a couch versus game, and we sort of only realized later that as so many people would be demanding, to have online play, and by that point it was kind of too late.
Online play is a whole different beast.
Yeah, I mean, we one of the for one of our classes, some members of SkyPyre, or some, I guess, SkyPyre wasn't yet a company, but people who would become members of SkyPyre, we have I made that sufficiently confusing?
The once and future Sky Pirates.
One of the projects we were working on, we were like, oh man, it'll be cool if we've got someone doing kind of like almost like an asymmetrical multiplayer experience, where it was like this horror game where you'd have a player navigating this kind of maze-like environment, and then the other player would be like the person on the computer with the information of the maze, and they would be able to help the player in the maze and kind of open doors and unlock stuff. But they, of course, and there's a monster in the maze, but the player on the looking at the map didn't know that, and is kind of trying to find stuff. But so that was the idea of it. But then, of course, it's like, okay, so how do we have it so that different people on different computers can do that? And it's like, it's asymmetrical, right? It's not like two players can just spawn in and whatever. One person has to have this kind of godlike view of things, and how's that going to work? And when we were first coming up with it, it's a classic, what has become a SkyPyre taboo, where one of a certain other David had done what we might call a cursory amount of research on the subject of multiplayer in Unreal Engine, and declared it shouldn't be that hard. Which, yes, as it's something that we try not to say nowadays, because guess what? It certainly was that hard. It certainly was.
I mean, even that long ago, which was, that was third year.
Yeah.
Which would have been what, 3 years ago almost now, something like that. I mean, even in those 3 years, technology for multiplayer technology has just gotten more accessible, from what I understand. I still have yet to really dig into it, but I wouldn't don't be too surprised if you see a different multiplayer SkyPyre game in the future, just because it is something I personally want to try and dig into.
Yeah, it would be cool.
It's just that Blobs is not built for it. I don't, at least as far as I know, just sort of grafting it into Blobs is not really a feasibility. And ultimately, when we set out to make Blobs, we wanted to, kind of, I guess, learn to walk before we ran. And so we really didn't want to have to deal with too much that we didn't have experience with.
Yeah. And to some extent, I think that Blobs was, we felt that couch co-op games, or not couch co-op, couch multiplayer games were something that I guess is, in general in gaming, is kind of been, I wouldn't say discarded, but especially display, it's not basically non-existent. And I don't know, and it's couch multiplayer is fun, and we wanted to bring some of that back.
I mean, I think it's a surprise. I think we actually were surprised by the response to some degree. I think I feel like we shouldn't have been surprised, but I already brought it up how, there was quite a lack of, or rather a much more loud call for, online multiplayer. And I feel like, our aim to try and, bring couch multiplayer back was a little bit misguided, I suppose.
Yeah.
I mean, I think we were kind of remembering, the times where couch multiplayer was like the way to do multiplayer. Nowadays, it's not. I mean, it's still a novelty, and I think it's great when it's an option. But I mean, the reality now is that most people play multiplayer on the internet.
Yeah, I mean,
it's a lot easier to make friends online.
You do have like, I guess you could call it couch multiplayer. Games like Jackbox. That's pretty popular.
Yeah. No, for sure. But even Jackbox, you can play. Like, people play it on streams and stuff. Like,
that's true.
You don't even need to be at the same area. It connects online. It's not. It's definitely more fun in person. But again, not required.
Yeah, it's true. So since all three of you are more well versed in coding than I am, I want to ask. If so, like when you're making a single player game and then you look at a multiplayer game, whether it's local multiplayer, online, whichever, what are some of the considerations right from the start or throughout development or whatever? What are some key differences or things that you think about to really make sure that you're ready for whichever side you're going with?
You said between single player and multiplayer?
Mm-hmm.
Well, the major difference, we talked about it a little bit before, but like for controls, if it's a single player game, you don't have to worry too much about how the input, I mean, you do, but like not as much, how the input of like a controller or whatever is taken into the code. Whereas in a multiplayer games, let's say Blobs, where you could have eight players, all with their own controllers, you need to make sure to plan for that you're going to be getting, like, how are you going to be able to manage the 8 inputs and ensure that, oh, yes, this controller's inputs are going to this, this code, which is going to move this specific character. I mean, that's more Andrew's ballpark, but I think it's something like that.
Yeah. Another thing off the top of my head is having more, like, everything in your game needs to be generic and modular when it's multiplayer. If you're gonna have, for single player, you have your player. I mean, it's your player. There's one player. There's always going to be one player. There's never going to be 2 players, and you can just sort of build on that one player, and and your game managers and your enemies only have to worry about one player, and that player is always going to be there, so you never really have to worry about it.
Right. Yeah.
Whereas in multiplayer, suddenly each player has to be a generic player, and you can't assume how many players there's going to be. You can't assume all their states are going to be the same, or you have to and then you have to any checks you do for like a player object, you suddenly have to do for several. And it just multiplies everything by, however many your max players could possibly be.
Another thing to look into when trying to decide between a single player and a multiplayer game is just like how manipulatable you want your code to be. Where if you're playing like a single player game and you release it to the public, and then you got modding communities out there, and you've got people that like to break stuff. In a single player game, it's not a big deal. It's on their own system. It's not affecting anybody else. They can make a Dragon Thomas the Tank Engine if they want to, because really, who cares? It's their own game, right? But in a multiplayer game, you have to be a lot more careful, where you don't want those people to get an unfair advantage. I mean, I remember playing like one of the big first PC games that I got really, really into that was multiplayer was Call of Duty 4. And that was a time when PC hacks were just rampant on that game. There's like, aimbots and wall hacks and all these things that somebody can manipulate the code of the game to give themselves an unfair advantage. So I don't know if that's necessarily more of a development thing than like a maintenance kind of thing, but it's another thing you have to keep in mind when you're making a multiplayer game.
It's true.
Oh man, that's actually, from what I understand, that's actually one of the major pitfalls in Fallout 76,
Yeah.
which is like, and it's funny because like that's actually exactly what that's pretty much like in my mind the worst offender of tacking multiplayer onto a single player game. And like the biggest, the thing that makes the most obvious is pretty much what you just said. Lack of like file security, I guess, for lack of a better word, where the server's not checking to make sure your game files are the same as everyone else's game files. So you get that single player modding experience or ability, but you're in a multiplayer setting, so suddenly that gives you an unfair advantage.
Yeah.
And that's something that should have been left behind, in the Call of Duty 4 days. Like, if you're doing a multiplayer game, competitive multiplayer game online, and with whoever wants to can join in, it's like, well, you need to have security measures in place to make sure that the playing field is level.
Absolutely.
Yeah, because from what I understood, is that there's no, or if there is any, it's very minimal. But there's no client-side monitoring and filter.
Yeah,
I mean,
it's so unsecured. It's crazy.
Yeah, without going into details, it's actually goes way beyond that too. It's pretty bad. Like being able to see people's like IP address.
Right, I think I read that too.
It's not encrypting it, not it's not it's not checking anything you're sending the server, so you could actually send it false information to do things like give yourself whatever items or health or ammo you want, or even boot other people off the server. Like it's absolutely crazy.
Yeah, that's a little scary. Well, I guess that's a good reason for that kind of explains why it dropped in price in like a week.
Yeah, that plus other things. It's I mean, it's like I was saying, they tried to make a fundamentally single player game into a multiplayer game, which the fundamental idea wasn't bad. I like the idea, but the execution was clearly very shoddy, and they were trying to make a buck off of nothing.
Off the name, really. Off the name and just the.
I mean, here's the thing: like
the expansion of it, I guess.
They could have made plenty of money if they'd actually put work into it, but they wanted to save money on making it and hope to get as much as they would off of a full Fallout title normally.
Yeah, because I think what was it? I think it was NoClip. Didn't NoClip make a documentary, or at least part of one for Fallout 76? I think, and in there they were saying, from the guys from Bethesda were saying when we looked into the code to try to strip it and make it into a multiplayer, we basically had to rewrite it all, because it was exactly what you guys were saying. Everything was linked and built around the player, and this was no longer valid. And like a game the size of Fallout or Skyrim or those games, they're pretty big anyway. Now everything, you have to basically redo it all. Especially for a company who's been around for at least 20 years or so, and they've never done it. That's a little daunting. And now we see how it turned out for them.
There is actually an example of a single player game that got turned into multiplayer surprisingly well. I don't know if any of you guys have played it, but it was the multiplayer mod for Just Cause 2.
Okay.
It's available on Steam, and Just Cause is a single player game. There's no question about it. But some group of people modded it and made a multiplayer version, and it worked surprisingly well. I'm not really sure how they pulled it off, but for what they were able to do just as a little mod, it was really good multiplayer.
That's a sign of
and
you
can.
there.
I think with enough know-how, you can definitely turn most games or any game you want into like some sort of multiplayer game. The trick is to make a good one. And that, not even just terms of like the back-end coding. I'm talking about in terms of like balance and stuff. Like one of the games I used to play way back. I played it a lot, and I brought it up to you guys plenty. But it was made way back in like 2000, called Oni, and it actually had multiplayer plan when it was first in development, but they had a bunch of delays and a lot of upsets in development, so they ended up scrapping it. But some people in the modding community actually started made a pretty rudimentary multiplayer mod for it, and it was actually some of the most fun multiplayer I've had. It was super buggy and very pretty unbalanced and stuff, but it was fun. But it was fun because you there was no open servers. You weren't playing it with just random people dropping in, taking advantage of the system and this and that. It's so you can really turn any game into a multiplayer game with enough know-how. But if you're releasing a game, you're saying, hey, this is a multiplayer game, then the work needs to be there. If that Just Cause 2 mod had been a full Just Cause release like DLC or new game, I mean, I'm sure it would have had the same reception as Fallout 76 without even having looked at the mod.
Yeah, exactly. Like if someone had released Fallout 76 and been like, "Oh, look, this is a mod of whatever," but it's like multiplayer, people wouldn't be like, "Wow, for modders, this is amazing." But for a AAA studio,
yeah, there's for sure that expectation of the AAA title, AAA quality level, and especially for a company who's been around for 20, 30 years or something, people have this expectation that you're going to have this nice polish. Even if there are bugs, at least they're minor bugs, just little things, not I can see your IP and literally hack the game.
Yeah.
And it's funny, you guys are saying like all these modders are able to turn other single player games into multiplayer. I've actually been following this development team for another Bethesda game, is a Skyrim. They're making a mod called Skyrim Together, and actually they're coming along really well. And I think they're gonna do. I think most of their videos most of them are 2 people running around, but I think I've seen up to 4. And it's just a normal Skyrim, but then they plug in their mod and you can play with people, and it looks like it's being all balanced out, and they're taking their time. So I think this could be another mod, kind of like Just Cause, how it actually turned out well.
Mm-hmm.
And before Todd Howard acquires them and re-releases it.
Well.
I mean, I wouldn't even be surprised.
And then re-releases it on, Alexa and all these other things.
Smart fridge.
Oh, God.
He pretty much have the next 10 years of content planned at that point.
Well, that's something else, eh? It makes me wonder, how many times have they released Skyrim?
Oh man.
Like so many times on all these different platforms. And, yes, a bit of work was done here and there to make it VR compatible or whatever, but they're not remaking a whole game. Meanwhile, they're making 76 in the background. I don't know, it just seems like all those resources on 76 and still it came out as it did. It's just surprising.
I don't know.
I mean, here's the thing. Something that I don't know. All I've been hearing about is the multiplayer badness, but in terms of art assets, in terms of gameplay, other than the multiplayer, how is the game?
So in terms of the assets, I believe. So I read an article, and it seemed to be that most things, apart from the new things, obviously like new creatures and whatnot, most things were basically copy-paste from Fallout 4, or at least it looked like it. And so much so that the code, some players were playing around, and I don't know what bug it was, but apparently a bug that was in Fallout 4 that was fixed by some modders, that same bug is shown up in Fallout 76, very much proving that a lot of it is copy-paste. But the unfortunate thing about this was because it's an online multiplayer game, you can't patch it with that mod anymore. So that bug is there to stay. And it was something bad too. It's like some game breaker or something. So I guess imagine Fallout 4 with no people and bugs.
Well, I think we've
yes.
The well of Fallout 76 has dried up, I think.
Yeah, I agree.
It's a good thing to point to when multiplayer design goes wrong.
Yeah.
Let's talk about some good examples of multiplayer.
I have a great example of multiplayer design that went well. Actually,
Here-
to clarify, sorry, David, were you going to make a point?
I was going to make a point, yes.
Okay, well, I'll let you make a point first, and then I'll get to my point.
Well, we talked earlier about games that had single player games that had multiplayer tacked on, and that's viewed as kind of a bad thing. But if you go back to Halo 1, right? Multiplayer was a feature that they kind of added in late. Like they weren't guaranteed to ship with it, and yet Halo 1 multiplayer was pretty successful, let's say.
Just a little bit, just a bit.
It's interesting to see the arc of multiplayer design through, for example, Halo, the franchise. Even if you just look at Halo 1, because you go, Halo 1 didn't have any online multiplayer. It was Xbox. Like, that was not like a thing that they they didn't really have that on the consoles. But then you had kind of unofficial sort of online multiplayer called, I think it was called like Halo Live, something to that effect.
Okay.
Or like Xbox Connect, there was some name for it, where you could do online Halo 1, but it was like so laggy.
Well, based on what you're saying, it might have been just run off of some dude's computer in his room or something.
I have no idea how it functioned, but it was shifty, so shifty. And then you get to Halo 1 on PC, and that has, it's got, the standard old PC, the different servers, and you can, the list of servers, like that whole thing, and that worked, fine at that point. But it's like, quote unquote, the same game, and it's got that different. And then of course you have Halo 2, which is like matchmaking on the Xbox. Everyone's gonna copy this thing on the Xbox. Here, this is Xbox Live now.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if you're one of the first people to do it right, and then you get success, yeah, you're for sure gonna have a lot of copycats and things come out of that.
Yeah, you were gonna say something, Tyson?
Well, you just brought up another idea of mine, and that's how much I miss server browsers in games.
I mean, they still exist on PC.
They're in some games, they still exist. In some other games, it's just you want to play this mode, cool. Here you go. You're in a map now. It's got people. Enjoy, have fun. I mean, it was always so much fun to look through a server browser, especially. I mean, for me, when I was really playing PC games online, I still don't have good internet, but back then I didn't have good internet either, right? So it was always a race to find a server that was on a map that I liked, that had people in it, and with decent ping.
Yeah,
and that's something that's. I mean, in some of the PC games that I've played recently, that's non-existent. I haven't found a server browser on a PC game recently, but even on consoles, like I would love to have a good server browser on a console that's actually prevalent.
Yeah, problem with server browsers, I mean, like me and Andrew used to play this game called Strike Vector. And that was a PC game that had a server browser, but due to a number of reasons, it let's just say it didn't land. And this is funny because it's a game about transforming fighter jets.
Yeah,
awesome,
fast-paced dogfighting game, a lot of fun.
Ooh,
I can actually think of several games off the top of my head that have server browsers that I play.
Yeah,
and what are they recently made?
Well,
yeah.
And the thing with Strike Vector is that when it was kind of failing, and it's like I still want it to play, And it's like, oh, there's like, there's a few servers and they each have like, 3 people in them or whatever, or like 1. And it's like, if there was just one server, if it was just doing if it had matchmaking, it would just be like one server with enough players instead of like this nonsense.
And also, like, you come across like a server browser with no one in any of the lobbies. You're not just going to go in a lobby and sit there until someone joins.
Yeah, exactly.
So, like, no players kind of invites no players, whereas in a matchmaking system, you have people just kind of sit in matchmaking without any idea that no one else is in matchmaking. So you just sit there until someone else joins. I can think of a lot of recently made games. 7 Days to Die has it. Ark has it. Had a few more. I mean, Gmod, that's not really super recent, but I mean, that has a server browser, obviously.
And it's not super recent, but Don't Starve also has it. Yeah, they're still around, but yeah, I get what Tyson means. But I think it's very much, I guess certain games it depends, like Strike Vector, but I think it depends on what kind of game it is too.
It completely depends. Like, I mean, the thing is, for a lot of games, like if you're looking at like, actually no, Overwatch has a server browser. Now I think about it, I was going to Overwatch server, but it does have a server browser. Basically, if you have a moddable experience, let's say, like some sort of multiplayer experience where the server settings are changeable, like to any major degree, you're gonna have a server browser, because at that point you have to filter out and browse through, like, okay, the max number of players and the map pool and the mods a lot of the time.
Yeah.
But if you have just like a very straightforward, the developers develop like this experience, there's these maps, there's these game modes, and that's it. Well, then, there's no point in going through browsers because all the servers are going to be the same.
It's a good point.
And it's just a better user experience to press, okay, I want to play this game, pop through in a map. It's less effort.
Yeah, I guess
yeah, I miss server browsers too, though. I think one of my favorite games having with a server browser was the Jedi Knight games. Ton of fun with those, and that's actually a really good example of single player and multiplayer games. Solid single player, solid story, and the multiplayer was excellent because on top of like just you have all the same mechanics as single player, and because everyone has the same mechanics, it's pretty balanced. And then on top of that, you had mods, and the nice thing is that they were balanced mods because it was server controlled. So for each server, the server would have local mods on it, and everyone to play on the server, you'd have to download those mods. And it can make for a lot of very wacky, zany fun.
Mm-hmm.
People making really crazy stuff on servers and really good communities and stuff. It was just a really good, solid games, single player and multiplayer together.
Another example of good single player and multiplayer together games is the Borderlands series. I mean, there's not as much PvP in it. I mean, there is. If you really want to go down that route, you can duel somebody, which is kind of like your PvP.
Yeah.
But I mean, for what the game is, I mean, it tells a good story, and then you can enjoy the story by yourself, which is perfectly fine, or you can play it with friends, right? And I mean, from my own experience, you generally have more fun playing it with friends than playing it by yourself. Yeah. Especially, you get into raids with people. You can laugh at the jokes. It's a lot easier to laugh with somebody than to laugh by yourself. That's why watching a comedy in a theater is so much different than watching a comedy at home. Yeah, it's that whole like mob mentality, right?
I don't disagree with you. It is a great multiplayer game, but I mean, it's like I was saying earlier, where I pretty much lump co-op in with single player, simply for the fact that everyone's kind of doing the same thing. And again, you don't have to worry about balance. Actually, if I remember correctly, the PvP in that game was actually pretty tacked on at least from a user experience point of view. Where,
I mean, speaking from a balance perspective, the PvP is not good. If somebody who's like max level decides to duel you and you decide to duel them back and you're like level 10, there's no hope. You're going to get stomped.
Well, no, it's not even a level thing. It's just like some like class abilities and stuff are just really good, or some weapons are just really good.
Krieg's Bay.
I don't disagree with them adding it in because it is fundamentally a co-op game, and there's not really a penalty for losing a duel. It's just like if it wasn't in, people would be like, oh, well, why can't we duel each other? It's one of those things, and we actually had this a lot in Blob. Just like, why don't we just let the players do this? Like, it's up to them. They can decide not to do this if they want, but taking power away from the players to do stuff they want to do is not really a lot of fun.
Yeah. I mean, like that's another thing. Situations where you're able to have it become PvP from PvE.
Mm-hmm.
Going back to the Fallout 76, I mean, that's enough. That's specifically talking about PvP. I've heard some crazy things. I don't know if this is 100% true, but what I heard is to initiate PvP, you have to shoot someone, and they take no damage. They take like 1 point of damage, and they're in PvP mode. And then when they shoot you, they do full damage.
Well, yes, that is correct. The first shot, whoever is the aggressor is like a hey, I want to fight you, and then if the person retaliates, the fight has begun as soon as the other guy decides to shoot you back.
Right, but it's like every time. That's, to me, is crazy. That it's like, instead of just having like a PvP server or something, it's just like, oh no, you have to. If you shoot someone, they can shoot you, but it's like you're always gonna lose if you shoot first, because you do almost no damage to them, and then they can just.
Yeah,
crazy to me.
I guess so. Yeah.
I mean, really, it comes down to stakes, right? Like I said, Borderlands, there's no stakes in the duels. It's just pure fun. Like, you don't get anything for winning aside from bragging rights, and you don't lose anything for losing. Unless you duel in a really dumb place, in which case you're at 1 HP and you can get smacked. But I mean, don't do that. But yeah, whereas like if the game is built around, like if the stakes are the gameplay, like if the whole point of playing that game is to win or lose against other players, then you want that to be even.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Actually, another thing I kind of want to bring up in terms of multiplayer balancing is asymmetrical balance. Designing a multiplayer game is a lot easier if all the players have the exact same abilities. I mean, Blobs is the case in point. All the blobs have the exact same capabilities. There's no way for one blob to get an ability that another blob doesn't have. The closest thing I can think of is blob size, which modifies your stats a little bit. But, that's not off limits to anyone. Whereas you have games like, MOBAs are a perfect example, where literally every character is a completely different, has a completely different set of skills. And those skills have to be balanced with every other character in the game. And that's just a whole other can of worms right there.
It does sound like a nightmare.
Absolutely.
I mean,
that's why, like, for us, we the only patches we really have to come out with are bug fixes if those come up, and content. And maybe the odd balance fix if we really notice, like, over a long period of time that something.
Yeah, but see, a balance, even a balance thing for us, it's like, oh yeah, this blob is super powerful when he hits the other person. Well, so does the other player. So really, that advantage is not really an advantage anyway.
Yeah, exactly. At that point, you're more balancing fun, or you want to maybe reduce the average time of matches, or that kind of thing. Whereas, in some of the bigger MOBAs, anytime you make a change, you're gonna have to make another change to account for it, and that's why every you have balance changes coming out every couple weeks for those games, because it's never gonna truly be even.
Yeah, they can try to be there, but then, yeah, that's why.
Yeah,
that's also the problem with like something like Overwatch. Not only do they have to constantly tweak the balancing and whatnot, but they keep adding new heroes, which completely changes like the gameplay itself, which then you have to rework all of balancing anyway. So they make it even more difficult for themselves.
Yeah. I mean, on the bright side, you kind of have to have enough of a player base to do the testing for that. Like, and if they were not going to add any more characters or maps or any updates, they could hypothetically eventually come to some sort of agreeable equilibrium with the characters. But every time you change something or add something, you shake it up and you have to redo the whole process over again. And you need players to go through it rigorously and find all the loopholes and the exploits and the strategies to figure out what to patch. Oh, I'm sure there's stuff in blobs that we could probably patch up, but we just don't have enough of a user base to know what those are yet. And,
even
if we did, like, again, all blobs have the same access to the same abilities, so
Yeah. I mean, in any multiplayer game where you're going to have a PvP aspect, you have to have consistent balancing. Like, even in sports games, like I play a lot of the NHL game with my brother and a friend of ours, and there's a specific mode that we play called EA Sports Hockey League, where you play as a specific position player, and then from there you can choose like what type of player you want to be, right? So you could be a sniper or a playmaker or an enforcer, or different types of hockey players that there are in the sport. And I mean, you're going to have balancing issues even there, because like there are some players that maybe they go a little too fast, or maybe they hit a little too hard, and it's a little unfair. So I mean, no matter what you do, if you have a PvP aspect to a game, there's going to be balancing. There's no denying that.
Yep.
Yeah.
Another aspect to single player versus multiplayer game design that I can't believe we haven't brought up yet is money.
Ooh, yeah.
I mean, let's take a trip back in time to oh god, when was it? 2012, 2013? I don't know. When did GTA Online come out?
Oh god. That's a good question.
It's been a while.
But yeah,
it's been a long while. But think back to that time when GTA 5 came out. I was really excited. They took the month to let everyone play the story. Everyone really liked the story, and Rockstar was like, "Oh yeah, we're gonna push out DLC for the story." And then GTA Online came out, and it made like $1 billion in no time at all. As soon as they opened up microtransactions, so as soon as that giant pool of money came in, Rockstar just kind of threw single player development out the window, because why would they waste resources on like having voice actors come in and doing new animations and new stuff like that, when they can just whip out a new car and make like $50.
Yeah, for sure.
So to answer your question, GTA 5 came out in 2013. So it's been a while already. And and a perfect example of what you just said, like the whole why waste resources on this aspect when you're making money on this one, is, I can't believe I'm bringing it up, but Fortnite.
Oh god, Fortnite.
I mean, Fortnite was a single player PvE game. Maybe it might have had co-op, I'm not sure, but it had
it was a co-op game fundamentally.
But it was a PvE game, and then with the option of free multiplayer, and then multiplayer just took off, and no one gave a crap about the original game concept, and was like, all right, well, and now everyone knows all over the internet, all it is the PvP, Fortnite, and no one even, I'm sure that most players don't even know the original Fortnite concept. I'm sure they don't even know that it wasn't made specifically to be a PvP.
It could be. It's interesting because I actually played the PvE mode before the Battle Royale came out. It's not a bad game. It's just it was honestly just a matter of hopping on the bandwagon. They saw how good PUBG was doing, PlayerUnknown's Battleground, and they're like, hey, let's cash in on that.
Yeah.
I mean, honestly, great move by them. But it's funny though, because it really shows how where the AAA game industry is focused. It's focused on money ultimately. That's where you see Fallout 76 going. They tried to spend as little as possible to make as much as possible. That backfired, but you see where their aim was. You could make the same accusation about Diablo Immortal.
Well, we don't know that yet, but yes, I could see that.
I mean, as far as I understood, it's like almost exactly like this other mobile JRPG type game that's like nearly just reskinned and resold. Like,
that's what people are saying, but the game.
I don't know how true that is, but I can guarantee you that developing that game on mobile is going to be cheaper than developing like a AAA, console or PC title.
Oh yeah, for sure.
You see it time and time again. I mean, to be fair, that's how they got to where they are, is money, and that's how they stay where they are, is money.
And
but
it is a business, so.
But I mean, like Tyson was saying, it really sucks that single player games have taken a hit because of it, and that's why you see a lot more single player games in the indie market. Because I feel like, it'd be unfair to say that the indie market is completely free of greed, I suppose, for lack of a better word. But ultimately, a lot of people are in the indie market as for their passion. They're passionate about it, like we are. We want to make games that we want to make. We're not trying to cash in on any trend or cash in on microtransaction DLC or be predatory with our prices or anything. We want to make games, and I think honestly, I think I speak for all of us. If we were just rich and we could just make games and give them to people for free, I think we'd do it. I think most of us are in it because we want to make the games, not because we want to make money off of them.
Yeah.
But ultimately, we need to make money off of them to make more games. So
I can't remember who said it, but someone said if you get into game design because you want to make money, you're doing the wrong thing.
Yeah.
Yes. No. You don't get into this business to make it big, so to speak.
Unless you do want to get into that business to do that, in which case, go work for EA.
Or any AAA game.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, honestly, there's very few AAA studios left over that I have any hope for, that they're not just doing things for the money.
Well, see, so it makes sense. So the studio industry leaders, whether it's a AAA game in the game industry or whatever, they'll usually be the ones to lead the industry in one direction or the other. What's interesting with game development is that AAA have always been the leading force of it, logically, but because a lot of them anyway seem to be going into this, let's just make money, and multiplayer is making us money, like you were saying, single player's taking a hit, and indie games have like filled in that void almost. So it almost feels like, this could change, of course, I can't tell the future, but it almost feels like there will be a split, basically. So like AAAs may go like mainly multiplayer, whereas indies may go single player, and then maybe in the future you'll see like a really clear line between the two.
I doubt it. Honestly, I think the trend for indie games is people make ideas. They make the games they want to make. They'll come up with an interesting idea and then make that game. We've seen it on kind of like a accelerated scale in game jams, of just the amount of crazy ideas people come up with and the games that come out of that. I think that's the indie studio, like the indie industry in a nutshell, is just people have a cool original idea and they'll try it out. And I think like a lot of them don't end up sticking. Like there's, for every game you see come out on the indie market that gets popular, there's 100 that never see the light of day.
Of course, yeah.
Yeah.
But ultimately, I don't think the indie market will lean towards single player just because the AAA industry is leaning multiplayer.
No, I'm not saying because of it, but I'm just saying like maybe there's going to be like that weird shift. I don't know. But
yeah, I mean, single player is definitely a more feasible thing to make for someone who doesn't have a lot of resources.
It's true. That is actually a really good point. I mean, ultimately, if you're talking multiplayer, you're talking servers, and servers cost money.
Yeah.
I mean, the opinion that I'm gathering from you guys is that AAA titles are currently focusing less on single player, and that kind of stinks to me, like the attitude that single player games are dying. But I mean, I have several cases to the opposite, especially this year. I mean, like in the last year, we've got games like Super Mario Odyssey, like God of War, like Spider-Man, Cyberpunk 2077. I think is single player. From what I can tell,
it is. Yeah.
So there's still like a real push for quality single player games, and especially in the cases of Spider-Man and God of War, like those are big selling games and they're single player. So I think I'm hoping that the AAA industry is going to see that and say, hey, you know what, maybe this is something we should still invest some money in.
Here's the thing: all the games you just named, with the exception of Cyberpunk, are sequels or big franchises that already sold a lot of money. Really, it's not down to multiplayer makes more money. It's multiplayer makes more reliable money. If you come up with a new multiplayer game, that's more likely to do well, and it's more likely to make more money. Whereas single player games, come out with a new single player game, if that doesn't do well, people just aren't going to buy it. For single player games, there's a much higher barrier to entry. Whereas, for a lot of multiplayer games these days, they're free with microtransactions. So people will try them and then, kind of get hooked and then, end up spending on microtransactions, whatever. Single player game doesn't look good. They're not going to drop the money. That studio's going to go under.
And
So, I do have to give it to the AAA studios. Like I mentioned it before, they got there because of money and they're staying there because of money. So, if they want to keep going, they do have to make money, which means they have to make more careful and calculated decisions. And it sucks that, they've had to sacrifice integrity for that, in my opinion. But that's, that's how it is. And so you just named a bunch of games that sure were great single player hits, but the only one on that list I can think of is Cyberpunk 2077.
And even then, that's more based off like developer reputation than anything else.
Yeah, exactly.
It looks awesome, but like it's CD Projekt Red, right? They kind of have a high standing in the gaming community.
Oh, for sure. And
you
they're
make a good point.
Yeah, exactly. But that's that's a good point with them. They're actually probably one of the few people I can think of that, could release they'll actually focus on single player games because Witcher 3 was their last title. That did amazingly well.
That's true.
And they've retained a lot of integrity. I just wish more studios would do that.
Well, we'll see. Only time will tell. All right. Well, I'd say that's a good spot to call it. Good discussion. We kind of jumped all over the place, ending with business and money. That's a big part of it.
As always.
Yeah. All right. So thank you very much for joining us, and we'll see you in a month.
See ya.
Bye-bye.